All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's 4 p.m. and we'll start right away because we have a very exciting 60 minutes ahead. People in Zoom should also be able to hear me, or you might not be able to see me, but you will see the speaker in a moment. Welcome to the second seminar, the Gera seminar series on sociology of teaching and learning. Very, very exciting seminar series. And today we'll be focusing on this one thing, hey, that you might have AI. Who will be joining us for the seminar. Before I'll introduce Margaret, let me just note that what we'll do today is that we'll have a presentation, 30 minutes, after which the rest of the time is devoted to questions, conversations, dialogues. So the seminar really aims to be quite conversational, another way. There's actually quite a few of us in the classroom. I'm really hoping to get some dialogues going on. But without further ado, let me introduce our speaker today. Research Professor Margaret Bearman from the Center of Research for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning, Cradle, Deakin University, Australia, a name that I have not been able to learn in quite a few years. Cradle was much easier to remember, so it's a good acronym. Margaret has a first-class honours degree in computer science and PhD in medical education. She has taught and researched higher education and professional education for more than 2 decades, specializes in assessment and feedback in the digital age, AI, simulation, medical and clinical education. Why not? Why not? All right. Please.
Consortium for Higher Education Research in Asia from the University of Hong Kong. I've never been to the University of Hong Kong before, so I'm really delighted to be here and see so many lovely, familiar and new colleagues. I'm not in Australia, but I like to start talks about AI with an acknowledgement of country. And this is the country where I live, which is, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. And one of the reasons I like to do this in talks about AI is because we often turn to the new. It always excites us. We always think there's something new coming, the innovation, the latest thing. But when we think about education and we think about Indigenous people, when we think about traditional lands, we realise that education has taken place for many thousands of years, and that we're actually a step in a much longer tradition than we might otherwise think. So I'm going to talk about 4 things: higher ed and artificial intelligence. When I say artificial intelligence, I'm going to talk about a personal view of defining artificial intelligence. I want to talk about orienting towards quality, and I want to leave you with a provocation to discuss. It's really a dilemma more than a provocation. So, some papers that I've written on this topic. So if you're after references, those are the ones. But I wanted to really sort of put them there to give this sort of view of the field. So higher education and higher education and AI are have been around for a while, before ChatGPT, I'd like to point out. But the work was fairly limited. I just want to go through it really quickly. First of all, there's a 2017 work by Owen who really laid on the table the fact that in a time of AI, we need to focus on what he called uniquely human skills. And this has been picked up later in the literature. Zawecki Richter did a 2019 systematic review, and it said, oh, lots out there. I think the title of this paper is Where Are the Teachers? It was actually mostly technical, and there were only 2 papers that considered ethical implications. We did a 2003, or actually it was the data goes up to 2021, I think, critical review. And definitions of AI are mostly absent from mainstream higher ed literature and mostly defined in reference to human cognition. So even though everyone sort of knew it was important, no one was talking about it very much. A little, but it was niche. And then in 2022, ChatGPT, and everyone goes, oh my goodness, you know, Frankenstein is walking amongst us. And there are very polarised responses in the op-eds, which was mostly what there was. Things like, you know, disruption does not have to be a negative word. Sometimes it can be the mother of transformation. Let us take advantage of this new technology. And then these sorts of, we're largely defenceless against this novel threat to human intelligence and academic integrity. And we've heard a lot about academic integrity recently. In general, opinion was more positive than negative when we did an analysis of this. It's under review at the moment. So more people in higher ed are actually going, yeah, wow, great opportunity. They're not. And it's worth noting this echoes the AI discourses in the higher education literature. It's seen as either AI seen as a dystopian backdrop to a work of science fiction, or alternatively, an emancipatory turn in which Industry 4.0 will create a digital Athens where citizens will have increased leisure and a living wage. I'd like to live in that emancipatory turn. And again, I would say in higher ed, the discourses tend to be more techno-positive than not, although the others certainly exist. And we argue in that paper that such hyperbole can obscure definitional clarity and prevent more nuanced generative conversations, conceptualizations, particularly because AI is fundamentally changing higher education practices. And I would argue that it has or is. I mean, we had a conversation earlier today where I was saying, you know, social media is powered by AI. We live in a world that's mediated by AI. Every Google search you do, every Google scholarship. To talk about going forward by tuning to some of the deficits that we talked about before, about definitional clarity. And I think this is important because I often find in this conversation, particularly of large conversations, people get really worked up about AI. And they often say things like, well, that's not really AI. So sometimes people rely on technical definition. Now, if you're computer science, and I always put that in my bio because sometimes when I talk about AI, I don't usually do it otherwise, but sometimes people have said to me, suspiciously, how do you know? And it's probably the only time in my life my computer science degree has actually been valued to me. Sorry, that's not true. I apologise to all computer scientists. It's actually been a tremendously important foundation. And so you can say, look, we can talk about expert systems, or we can talk about machine learning and pattern recognition approaches, but how the AI is constructed. And from, you know, like ChatGPT is essentially pattern recognition. It's machine learning. I like to describe it to people who get a bit freaked out by it as an exceptionally expressive form of predictive text generator, like the sort you get on your phone. But it's fundamentally the same sort of idea. It patterns, it makes predictions. There are other sorts of definitions, and this is the most common, capability definition, what an AI does. Now, capability definitions are usually where people get sort of hung up about whether an AI is an AI or not. People will say, well, if it's exactly like a human, if it can do what a human does, then it's an AI. But you'll actually find that mostly people don't define AI in that way. So Russell and Norvig is a classic computer science textbook, and it argues that an AI seeks to identify the best possible action in a situation. That's a long way away from thinking and sounding and being like a human. Sometimes they're defined by the specific capability, driverless cars, image classifiers in pathology, writing feedback, really common, higher ed use. And then finally, there are relational definitions. And I'm going to fly the flag and say for education, I think relational definitions are by far and away the most important. How we act with AI. And relational definitions consider AI in its social context. Now, I quite like this definition by Johnson and Badicchio. This is an AI system. It's part of a socio-technical ensemble, combinations of artefacts, human behaviour, social arrangements and meaning. So that's saying that, you know, you take any form of technology, the clicker I'm holding at the moment, it does nothing by itself. It only does stuff in concert with me and you and the audience in the slides. Same with AI. And this is a definition that we've proposed. And not everyone agrees with it, but I find it a very useful starting point. So we're proposing to say that when you employ a technology and suggests a course of action that you can't trace, that is, you have to lean into the fact that it knows something you don't, then it's an AI. We call that an AI interaction. And formally, it's written as, in the context of a particular interaction, a computational artifact provides a judgment about an optimal course of action, and that this judgment cannot be traced. Sounds very fancy, but it has all sorts of implications. So someone would say, but a calculator isn't an AI. But by that definition, a calculator can be an AI. So if I'm a 4-year-old child and I'm playing on this calculator and I do long division, it will be completely mysterious to me. I have no way of knowing whether it's an AI or not. Whether it's true or not. I can't trace it. So in that instance, that's the calculator is acting as an AI, and I would claim that's an AI interaction. Now, if I come along and do long division on the calculator, it's not. It's just doing a calculation that I can perfectly trace. So you start to see the AI interaction by this definition is context dependent. Here's another example. This is my bio. I asked ChatGPT. It took me a long time to get my bio up. And the prompt was, it didn't know who Margaret was. I had to put the professor in front of it. And it gave me this. Now, I can tell you for a fact that this bio, 1, isn't correct. And 2, it's been written based on the bios that I've written for myself and circulated on the internet. I'm not a professor of higher education. I'd just like you to know. So I don't think ChatGPT here is actually acting like an AI at all. I know where that base material came from. I wrote it. And I know. Why is this important? It means that something's an AI when you have to take a leap of faith. So it necessarily involves a moment of trust to jump. The uses of technology in practice, as I've studied a little bit, you find that these are the points. You know, people who use pathology imaging classifiers, people who use, for example, Google Scholar, we all use it. We tend to look at the front page. We know it's not comprehensive, yet we rely on it. And I think by thinking in this way, particular time and place, person or people and the technology, we don't need to think about it as a neutral tool or deterministic, just in the relationship. So not what can it do for us and what is it doing to us, because both of those things happen. What are we doing together? And so then we can really start to see people and AI as part of a socio-technical system and full of complexity, indeterminacy and ambiguity. And I think this is the point. When you look at AI use in practice, it actually ups ambiguity. It doesn't help it. I've looked at heaps of data, pathologists going, in this instance of all, heaps sounds wrong. I've looked at a bit of data and it really is about prompting more uncertainty, prompting more work, because you don't know whether to trust or not. But we want, as educators, to equip our students to engage with this world. And this is the point about orienting. So, who determines what counts as good? Up here, you'll see some heels. You might have different responses looking at them. Someone might think, those are beautiful. I'd like a pair. Someone might think, oh, how can anyone ever walk in those? Someone else might think, gee, I don't understand why those are fashionable for women now, but they used to be fashionable for men 300 years ago. Someone else might think, oh, I just think they're a bit ugly. Who determines what makes shoes beautiful? Think of work in your discipline over the last 5 years. Why is something considered good? How do you know? Are there things that are considered quality in one location and not in another? And I'm sure you can think of those times. So this is the point. What counts as good quality is a socially derived, evolving and contextual process. It's not something that can actually, I would argue to this date, be generated through artificial intelligence because it's social and it's held between us, not within us, if that makes sense. And if we're to prepare students for an AI-mediated world, we need to offer understandings of quality that reflects this complex, indeterminate world they will inhabit. But they will have to trust an AI without knowing whether its answers are right or wrong, as we all do. And this is where evaluative judgment comes in, the capability to judge the work of self and others, and we'd argue it needs to be explicitly developed through orienting to quality. So we make some arguments about this, and they're kind of, I would have to say, straightforward arguments. I mean, I've been talking about evaluative judgment for a little while, and most of the time people go, oh yeah, but when you talk about AI, its value really starts to spring into focus. Because in AI, we need to be able to judge the outputs. We need to be able to know if something's good enough. But at the same time, we're in a situation with things like tools like ChatGPT, etc., can produce something that has a superficial appearance of quality, and sometimes the actual appearance of quality. How do you know? How can you make those judgments? We would argue that explicitly orienting to evaluative judgment, to developing it, and to all the other sorts of work that we do in assessment and feedback research, and we have some luminaries in the room, this is what counts. We also argue that you need to be able to turn evaluative judgment to AI processes themselves. And these are some examples here that I think are important to understand. There are good things about that, there are bad things about that. I don't think that's something that, as an educator, I'm probably going to be able to change, but we can equip our learners to deal with those implications. And a lot of the ethical situations come around these last 2 points: platformatization, the narrowing of scope, and where the data that underpins the generative AI comes from. It's always a question to ask yourself, where does it come from? Because generative AI, particularly machine learning AI, pattern recognition AI, is always looking at patterns from something. The patterns of the data that it's looking at, and it can only find things within what it has. It can't go beyond. And we can also use AI to develop our own evaluative judgment. And that point that I was talking about before, AI actually serves as a bit of a mirror to us. So we may be able to use AI interactions to help society understand that our standards are insufficient. Like, there's been a lot of controversy about Gemini producing, produce me a photo of a pope and you get a black female pope, and everyone's kind of going, but it's really actually quite useful because it's representing into us what our biases and our history is telling to us. And so I think that if we expect AI to be accurate, if we don't expect it to be ambiguous and complex and reflect our complexity, then we won't be able to understand how it can develop our evaluative judgment. Okay, that's enough of me chatting. Oh, that's short. Great, perfect. Thought it might be too long. I can always talk more if you need.
No,
No problem. So we'll leave you with provocation or a dilemma. So I think I put a lot of pretty words up here. And they're complex and things like evaluative judgment and their quality and orienting to quality and AI interactions. And they make a lot of sense. They ask us to engage with complexity and nuance and indeterminacy and ambiguity. But those things absolutely challenge us. I don't know if anyone else is researching academics in the academy, you know, overburdened, time poor, running the rat race. It's not an easy gig sometimes, even though sometimes it can be delightful. Our students who increasingly and probably have always wanted a qualification, but I would say that's getting more and more important for the same social reasons that we're running our own rat race as academics. They want to be successful, they want to get jobs, they want to live their lives. And complexity challenges that. And institutional systems, because let's face it, our institutions are really large. 100 years ago, a couple of thousand students. I mean, even when I was starting out, a cohort would be a couple of 100, 500, 700 was large. And now they're cohorts with thousands and thousands of students. These are all challenges. And so I guess that's really my question for you, my provocation. How do we promote a nuanced, critical conversation about educating students for a world of AI, where we avoid this dystopian-utopian divide, which is deeply embedded in our society? I mean, it's going to be there. I don't think, and to some extent, I don't say it's a problem. You need to know if it's important to say platformatization could lead us down a dystopian path. It's important to say that AI could have untold benefits, but it can't be the only response. And also in a sector when everyone's always asked to do more with less. And yet we want to open up the conversation. So that's really it, because there's a lot we can do in this space. I think generative AI offers us huge opportunities to teach and to learn, but we need time, and we need time for reading, time for thinking, time for discussing. And where are we going to get that time? So that's my provocation to you, and I expect you all to solve it for me online, face-to-face. Listen to me, see all my arm waving, of which there's been a lot. And I'd like to open up for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been a lovely cognitive challenge for me to have a look at the Zoom, try to map in the 17 different ideas that I had during our presentation. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful topic for this seminar series. This really is an idea that has to be understood on a wider macro level, influences the very daily tangible practices we have in higher education. Oof, I have a lot of ideas, but I'm going to restrict myself because we have a room full of participants today. So I'm going to start from the room. Any thoughts, ideas, questions? We have plenty of time for conversations. So please.
Have you tried out your 3 questions on ChatGPT?
No, I haven't, but I'm sure it would give me a very nice answer. A very nice answer. It generally does, just not very useful. Not to say that ChatGPT can't be useful, it can. And by the way, I can talk under wet cement, so please interrupt me because I'll just keep on going. Comments, thoughts, questions?
Start from here.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Margaret. It was really interesting. For the critical conversation of AI, of course, research is very important. But I see a lot of research these days. People certainly publish a lot about AI and ChatGPT. But most papers I see, actually, they're not that original or critical. They mostly do these kind of small experiment for the writing, use the ChatGPT. Let's see how students change the writing patterns after 2 weeks or 3 weeks with a certain number, 30 something students in one single program. That kind of repetitive, that's how I. Can you give advice, like, what's the kind of really topics and methods are lacking in this AI and research? And if you can give advice, what kind of areas should be really critically researching and engaged in higher education research? Thank you.
Sure. That's kind of a tricky question, but I'm really happy to engage with it. I think the reason we're seeing those studies is what you see when an innovation comes out like this. We saw this after the pandemic. You'll see a huge flurry of first publications. And the studies that can get up easily and work easily will be there. So I suspect better quality studies will be coming shortly. I don't think there's a single answer to that. It's like with any form of research, you do those little incremental pieces that are like this, that go together to form a big picture, and you do some bigger pieces. I think the critiques you've just made could be made of the field generally. We often do small, interventionally based, single-site research. So, the obvious return would that be, larger studies, et cetera, et cetera. I think the biggest problem for me, and also there'll be two big arms here. One is going to be studies that focus on how we prevent students from cheating with generative AI. I mean, that the academic integrity angle. So AI and assessment, with that tilt towards assessment of learning. I think there's going to be a lot of studies around that. And then there's going to be a lot of studies, I think, about the sort of general, using it for enhancement. And then the studies that I'm most interested in are about, this is so I've got to sell it to you because it's what my interest is about living in a digital world. So, AI is everywhere and we don't take account of what it means. We're in the business of knowledge creation, and AI is affecting how knowledge is created and how we understand it. And I think, to me, those are the big, interesting questions here. Now, you could do that in a very narrow slice. You can do that in, whatever your field of interest might be. But I think, to me, that's the most interesting question. I don't know whether it's the most critical one. My own interests mean that I think it will be the most critical. It might not necessarily be. Institutionally, I would say the academic integrity issue is bigger.
Do you want to respond?
No.
Thank you.
Are you sure?
Let's see.
I've got some more questions on here.
Should I ask a question or? Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, quite nice what you presented, but isn't it really expected? I mean, if we replace AI by science, and you presented exactly about science, the results will be exactly the same. It's based on trust. It's currently very much in the hands of corporations. The rat race is because we follow journals that are indexed. A lot of these journals are owned by private publishers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, we're publishing more because this is part of what is expected. If we know endogenous growth theories, we know that civilizational advancements, and in academia as well, have been related to improvements in efficiency in using resources, material resources, time, etc. So this is just, and of course, everything is based on trust. Science is based on trust, knowledge is based on trust, the economy is based on trust. And we build on what was built before. So what exactly are you saying? This is what I'm trying to get, because it doesn't seem really anything that new in terms of what AI brings. So is that your point, that this is just simply another part of the evolutionary process?
I like it. as a point.
Yeah, I would
Like,
like.
people don't, yeah, sorry.
No, I would like to get your point on this, because I wasn't completely clear on the point that you were making. What is the point that you were making? Is
Which is mostly economical. You know, you talk about, sorry, the lovely, lovely man, Christian Haydenson. Any rate, you know the man I mean, disruption man. Look, you know, he was using in very specific terms about replacement of technologies. You know, the refrigerator. It's the investment in a new easy to economically produce investment. So there's a sort of economic disruption. I'm arguing that this is not it. And then there's disruption, sort of like Kuhnian disruption, you know, huge paradigm shift. Yeah, well, you know. So no, I guess I'm not arguing it's disruption. What I'm saying though, and to talk about trust and the different forms of trust, okay? So when you talk about trust and the sorts of forms of trust you're talking about often tend to be social forms of trust. Do you trust science? Do you trust the university? There's also interpersonal trust. And I think this is probably closer to the point here. When you use an AI and you have a piece of information in front of you, you have to choose, in essence, whether to work with it or not, whether you will take it or not take it. And this is the point. Yes, I think it's very similar. I think that we should be interrogating science. I think that we should do that more. I think this is a lot of this, I mean, you know, a lot of the similar stories, but I think it's increasingly important in this age because it's hidden. The black box and the tracing make life more difficult. So so that is actually my fundamental point, not that this is something new and disruptive, but if we define it around the issue of trust, then what it reveals to us is not, oh my God, AI is going to do everything, or will disrupt everything, or etc. But it defines for us what it is we must learn to be able to work with it. Now, if you're doing a science degree, you will learn about how to, you know, and I did do a science degree as well, part of the computer science degree. You know, learn how to read a paper. You learn how to collect evidence. You learn the moves. So I'm saying in AI, those moves won't necessarily be able to be learned. So in knowledge, we will have to take that leap. So if you look at, say, this gorgeous paper I wrote about these radiologists, and they're sitting there going, I've got to do bone age assessment, right? And this is critical for some patients, depending on this, it will be critical, it'll be a huge outcome. They're sitting there saying, well, I think as an expert radiologist, I think the bone age is this, but the AI is telling me it's that. What do I do? How do I resolve this ambiguity? And they have to make a call in that situation. It's quite a complex call. And I think that's a positive situation. What I think we want to guard against the thing is that if you look at trust in science, it ought not to be so easily won. Oh, scientists are wearing white cloaks and they're on television and they're telling us to do things. We need to have some critical interrogation of this, because otherwise, when pseudoscience comes out, people can't tell the difference. So yes, I think it's part of the same thing, but I think it's more so. There you go. That's my point. Are you happy with that as a point? Good. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah, thanks.
Maybe we can take a look at the questions in the chats. There's one very long one by Mario Paludi. Margaret, it might be easy for you to also read it from the screen.
Okay. Hello. Here's my question, discussion on the law perspective about the AI environment. One of the main issues about use of AI, including in HE, is regulation. Talks about GDPR and the EU AI ACT. Legal responsibilities of private operators. So you want to ask, are they sufficient? Regulation controls the core of AI. And functioning of algorithms are not only in effects, thus broadening the perspective from ex post to ex ante. The problem with AI is that you can't really regulate it in that way. Not all of it, but certainly you use the technical definitions, not the interactive definition. The interactive, that's tricky, but you're really talking about technical definitions there. And in my view, there are two things that need to be considered here. One is the algorithms. Everyone's going on and on about the algorithms. Actually, all the algorithms are pretty much the same. The algorithms are not the issue. The data corpus is the issue. And we need to have transparency. I don't know about regulation because that's hard, but regulation I would hope for, not my field. I'll just throw that in the ring. You could talk me out of it later. But I'd certainly say transparency about data, because data is what goes into it. And if we, as I said, you know, it's a pattern recognition, recombination. Think of generative AI more like that uncle of yours in a the uncle of yours who sits in the corner and tells you big stories about things, or your mother telling stories of things that you did in your childhood. They're not exactly accurate, but you know where they come from. And that's really important. At the moment, we know that the stories won't be accurate. That's okay. We can't really regulate against that, but we need to know where they come from. That's what we can have some control and transparency about. I'm sorry, that was the worst metaphor ever. For people who are watching this in perpetuity, I hope it makes sense. I'd like to plead jet lag, but there was only 2 hours to Another question from the chat.
Let me just ask if anyone from the room wants to continue.
I'll join to that, please.
Or disagree, comment on that? If not, we can move on. But at any point, please, anyone, we can have dialogue. You don't just need to go
Yeah.
question, answer, question.
That was a great dialogue, except I mostly talked and I mostly answered. I like that all the time.
I was using facial expression to be angry and happy and all sorts of things.
Actually, no, I'm gonna ask the people, I mean, there are a few more questions on here, but what I would like to ask, given that that was such a lovely question, to the room and to the floor, is about trust. What do you think about this issue of trust? Any thoughts? I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious.
Would be particularly interesting as student perspectives.
Do you feel like you know what to trust?
Again, trust in what exactly? For example, I like what you brought right now. I mean, the idea of transparency of the data. But what do you mean by that? How do we assess data that in a way that is neutral? Because there's no neutral data.
We can't assess it, but we can be, and I mean, transparency is a very difficult word at the best of times.
Right.
But you could say where it's from. I mean, OpenAI is not doing a tremendously good job of saying where its data's from. It's some scrapey sort of thing. We could do that, sure. I was in a parliamentary inquiry and there was some discussion about but if we give it the right data, then it will give the right answers, and it won't. So we get not used in assessing the data, but we need to have a sense of where it's come from.
But does it really matter? I mean,
Yes.
who can do that? Who can do that assessment? It reminds me of this idea of the fake news. I remember going to a conference and they were talking about fake news. And they were saying, well, it should be the user that is going to check where the data comes from, which is completely unrealistic because, come on, probably I'm checking the news during coffee. I don't have the time to spend, maybe I only have 10 minutes to see the news. I don't have half an hour or 1 hour to try to figure out where the data comes from. Someone or something has to do it for us. Right now, you have some services that tells where, if the news was coming more from right-leaning, left-leaning, politically, newspapers, so on and so forth, which helps. But in the end, who can assure that the data is even true?
So,
It comes
This is
with
where I-
regulation in a sense.
but not, I think, but the regulators aren't there. They can't test every news story, nor do they. But they do have regulation around some things in media. So, I'm not an expert in regulation, apparently. But I would be suggesting that there has to be, successful regulation. It can't be too tight and it can't be too loose. And I think that we need to know at the very least more than we currently know at the moment. I don't know very much about the GDPR, the person who asked the question. I'm not in the EU. But every time I speak to someone who has to comply with it for ethics reasons, and I have a few colleagues in the EU, they have that look on their face that makes me wonder whether it's really doing what it needs to be doing. I think we're only at the start of the data intensification. But I guess my point is more that, I think that data is the key here. And trust is intimately linked to data because you need to be able to know where your data comes from. Now, you're thinking here about general knowledge, but what if, I do a lot of work in health. What if vaccines are being developed from a group of like your physical information and mine, it goes out on the internet or wherever it gets shared through these regulated databases. It's complex and it needs to be regulated. And so there are models of regulation that are out there. Where we fit within that, I don't know.
Question.
Yeah.
So are you
Sorry,
guys,
please, Mr. Mike, so people might hear you as well.
thank you, Professor Bearman. My question is, are you implying that educators and students alike should have a healthy distrust of artificial intelligence? And if so, I think there was a question on the chat talking about how do we help people build that evaluative judgment, whether not just students, I think teachers too, because from your research, do you see that academics and teachers are actually kind of blindly trusting? And what would help to build academics, teachers, and students to have that healthy, or I guess first, are you implying that the distrust is healthy? And if so, what would help to build that in the higher education world?
I think it's a really interesting question. And one of the things that I think, I think what we need to do is in that. And trust, it's not actually, it's actually placed in the affective domain more than in the cognitive domain. It's an emotion. It's an emotional response. Someone's been, I choose maybe, or do I just trust? So it's complicated. Don't think it's straightforward. I think that we should, I'm not talking about the world generally, but us in higher education, yes, I think we should learn to be skeptical. I think we should learn to be critical. I think criticality runs through everything that we do. And so, yes. And I think practically developing evaluative judgment, we have the means that we always have done. The first thing you have to do, the number one thing to developing evaluative judgment is attuning to quality standards. What does good look like? Have a robust conversation about what good looks like. Where are you at? What standards are we talking about? Because they really change, they really shift. And what we tend to do in our assessment pedagogies is we can often make that very simple. A good essay is one that has absolutely perfect APA referencing. You know, we're educators in this room, we know that's not the case. So it means grappling with tacit and holistic concepts. So I think I was talking before about how ChatGPT doesn't do line of argument. It really struggles with line of argument, you know, getting something persuasive that moves like this. But we don't really attune our students so much to these things that are holistic. Like we have to help them understand these complex, difficult moves, not the easy ones, and to say what the good things of that look like. And we can use all the tools of our trade, rubrics, peer evaluation, feedback, everything that we use all the rest of the time, but to attending to that notion of trying to get students to be able to identify what good looks like in other people and in their own work. That would be mine. And you could use AI in that to assess AI outputs, not to. But the critical thing is orienting towards what quality looks like in an absolutely complex way. I mean, science is luckier than some. It has rules, more or less or more, that involve a lot of subjective interpretation, but, you know, whatever more, whatever more.
Thank you. I was about to ask Francia's question, but next, so you beautifully tied these together.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump to the question by Creative Soul, which is
all the way
down there.
Yep.
Because it very nicely continues from this conversation. So we're starting to bring these macro level conversations to the classroom level or to the curriculum level. Tracy is interested in this collaboration between students and AI. And her question is, I'm curious about how this collaboration will unfold. It seems to me that students are currently just typing all sorts of questions in ChatGPT and saying, "Well, yes." Yeah, students. Literally, but this morning myself. This to me seems to be a low-level collaboration. How could we move towards more complex collaborations rather than simply remain in this realm of like simple like question-answer types of use of AI?
So I'm doing some research at the moment with a group. It's a collaborative. I'm not leading it. It's led by the wonderful. I'm Kelly Matthews from the University of Queensland. Sorry, I'm just having a moment there. But you were talking about what sort of research. This is a cross-institutional piece of research. We're talking to a lot of students, and we're asking them qualitatively about what they're doing, and they are doing some things that I think are really interesting, collaborative experiences with generative AI. They tend to be students who may already have some degree of IT experience or expertise. One student, for example, talks about that they've been a student there. I don't think are about content. They're not really about. So they're helping me keep things to word counts. So that's sort of, you know, they're helping me meet the genre of the task. That's one sort of collaboration. So they're using it to meet the requirements. Another would say things like, I start with brainstorming with it. I ask it. I ask it to give me a view of what the important things in the field are. Students use it to review their assignments and get critique on it, which they may or may not accept. So they are using it in quite complex and collaborative ways, certainly that I've heard, I think. But not everyone. Some of the students don't use it at all and are very happy not to use it. So we mustn't fall into the trap of saying all students, because many students in the focus groups are disinterested. Some students say they think it's cheating to use it. They don't want to. So you're seeing all sorts of variation coming out.
Any comments from students? No?
All right, if not, and please we do, it would be very, very interesting to hear. Some students from a higher education specialism present here, but maybe you can think for that. I jump to the next question, which again follows from this. So there's a question by Shintong Carol Wang, which continues from Margaret, from your idea that AI should be considered as a contextual, relational practice. And shortening this question a bit. So Carol is interested in the particular context of East Asia. And Carol is writing about the East Asian culture where teacher-centric learning is deeply entrenched, teachers traditionally holding authority and delivering knowledge from a podium is kind of an approach. I mean, personally, I would always be a bit cautious about this kind of labeling of cultures, but still, I think this is a very, very important question about kind of a geographical context for AI. I wonder if you'd have any responses on how we could better consider AI, perhaps particularly in the context of teaching and learning in this context.
Well, one of the really interesting things about AI is it is something, and the students are already saying this to us, we can ask it all sorts of embarrassing questions. We can ask stupid questions. It's not quite an authority AI, you know it can be wrong, but it is something you can test your work on. So it sits in an intermediary of having some vague, maybe distrustful, maybe not traceable knowledge. It's not the authority that your teacher is. Your teacher is invested in authority, whether they deserve it or not. They are. You know, they'll be the person making the assessment. They've set the curriculum. You know, I'm standing up here in front of you with all the full authority that I hold. And that does bear weight. But if there was an AI here, you could say to it, you know, ChatGPT, you know, tell me what's wrong with this argument. It might give you it might entirely agree with you. It might be agreeable. It might contradict you. But you don't have to grapple with an authority gradient on it. No one's going to see, no one's going to know. That's an advantage. So when we talked about getting AI to build a valuative judgment, one of the ways it can do so is by giving judgments on things. We know that students are putting their essays through and saying, how did I go? They go, I've asked it one time, I've asked it another, and it gave different answers. How am I going? And then, lo and behold, they might have to think about it. So I think it can have a lot of value in that. Some people are shy. I mean, I know that if I have to go to a counter and ask for anything, I won't. I would prefer to post things on a machine. You know, for some reason to say, could I please have a copy, seems extraordinarily socially challenging. So I would love an AI that could do it for me, right? So sorts of students is really interesting. And this is again work I'm not leading, but my colleague Simon Buckingham-Shump from UTS is leading, is exploring the idea of collective intelligence. So using AI as a lever to think about what does collective intelligence. Oh, you know, we've got some collective intelligence happening here in this room. We're all thinking together and online, and the thoughts are coming in, and we're holding ideas between us. What happens when we bring AI into this mix? What happens to the locus of authority then? And we know one thing about AI is that we believe it will alter where authority is held. And it looks like with data that authority does shift. So I think there's lots to explore. Now, that was a practical question. I've not given a practical answer. So let me give you some practical thoughts. I think that, and it's very similar to the idea that was raised before, I think we have the tools at our disposal to help our students in this time. But they're the same tools we've always had. You know, it goes back to my slide at the very beginning. Education has taken place for thousands of years. Education isn't changing, it's not going anywhere. So, you know, I really think this is a matter for us to be creative, to think about how we teach, we set students' activities, we learn, we bounce off each other. And I would really make a plea that if you go in and you try things like setting activities and peer work and assessment, Sometimes they're going to fail. And sometimes people are going to say, but we just want the answers and we want you, the teacher, to be the authority. That is going to happen. But don't let it stop you. Try and see what works. What does good look like in this context? There are examples of courses in any context where students rely on teachers and teachers have been able to engage with them and make it interactive and to build their own model. So I would be looking to those. I would also really encourage one thing, and I don't know how well this will go in East Asian context, I don't know how well this will go in context anywhere, but one thing's really clear to me from doing these interviews. Everyone here is an equal expert. Chat when it comes to generative AI, particularly like ChatGPT in particular. Your students in the classroom, students here, we're all on the same page together. I mean, as I said, you know, apparently I'm an expert, but reality is many of you may have spent more time working with ChatGPT than I will. You'll actually know it better than I do. And it's a real moment for, I think, academic humility and say, you know, this is a change in the world, disruptive or not, it is a change. Let's have a look together and see if we can tackle it that way. Because whether it is a brave new world or not, I mean, I would argue that it is, but I'd argue that it's always a brave new world, so I don't know if that really helps. But you can say, you know, this is a platform for us to learn to listen to each other and to work together. And I think that would be a very nice closing moment for the symposium, because I've just seen the time.
I was just thinking about to say, I wrote that down to my notebook with like very big letters, a real moment for academic community. Wonderful. Thank you so much for participating. And for those online as well, please do remember that we still have 2 more seminars in this seminar series. On May 14th, we have Paul Acton talking about knowledge and higher education, and on May 20th, we have Karen Corrett talking about relational pedagogies. So thank you so much, Margaret. And if you have any burning questions, I'm sure you can reach out to me.
There's some concrete, I should have also said, there's some concrete strategies in the papers as well to repeat one, but you know, difficult to remember and relay. Thank you so much. Hi,